All right, everyone, it's time to talk about how funny Bernie Sanders' essential political suicide is, because that's really what's happening right now. He made a tweet the other day that he really shouldn't have made. He's pissed that the Wisconsin primary is still going ahead. Now, keep in mind, this is Mr. Direct Democracy, power to the people, Trump is fear-mongering about the election dude himself. And he says, well, I'm not going to be doing any of the typical get out the vote stuff because I think it's a sham that they're even holding the primary. So you expect Wisconsin, which has the latitude to hold its primary and allocate its delegates, you expect them to punt it to June, benefiting you. Because what Bernie Sanders wants is this. He wants to make a big deal about this pandemic to try to argue that the results of the primary, which so far for him have been a disaster, and he's going to lose Wisconsin, by the way, by a significant margin. I'd say 20, 25 points probably. He'll lose, an enormous delegate edge. I think that puts Biden about 350 ahead of Sanders. That gives him close to clinching the nomination, actually. Bernie Sanders has lost, and he's losing more and more each time a primary is held. What he's hoping is that enough primaries will be delayed, that technically the DNC has already pointed out that by delaying your primaries, you're possibly giving up your right to allocate delegates in the normal way. He's hoping, therefore, that not enough states will be left to hold their primaries to actually allow Joe Biden to technically clinch it by the time of the nomination process ending. If that's the case, Bernie and his fans will say, look at this matchup poll from months ago, because Biden's doing better in those now. Look at these delegates. Look at the DNC rigging, Trump, matchups against Trump, polling. They'll pull out everything out of their ass that they can to try to justify the reason why Bernie Sanders should be the nominee instead of the man who actually won. Because they'll point out, and they won't be wrong, the man who won technically hasn't fully won, and you can't hold a physical convention. You can't hold a physical convention in which the delegates will actually be able to mill around with the candidates and talk to them. That's the normal delegation process. The normal process in a contested convention where nobody has a clear lead, nobody has clinched, is that everyone is released. All those delegates, they get released from their charge. And then everyone has a vote after a while of sort of meeting. Each candidate would give a speech, so to speak. They'd meet with the delegates. They'd shake their hands. They'd give them a brief spiel about why they're greater than everybody else. They would have a second vote. And then they winnow it down from there through their various processes. And I'm not sure how those other processes work because I don't think they've ever had to use them. I'm sure it's the Democratic Party, so it's probably from the 1800s and it's probably complex as hell. It's probably very convoluted and there's probably a lot of backroom cigar-smelling deals. Bernie Sanders is hoping that Biden will not technically be the nominee by the end of the process because he won't have enough delegates. But if the rest of the states that haven't delayed their primaries vote, Biden will probably have clinched it. At the very least, he will be so close to clinching it, there really won't be an argument to make for Bernie Sanders at that point. He'll be 500-600 delegates behind. The writing will be on the wall. The superdelegates would tilt it. But Bernie Sanders will be able to grandstand. And he's making money hand over fist. He's still got all of his army of teenagers sort of voters, and they're still, chipping in their $1 a month or whatever. For some reason, I don't know why anybody at this point would give money to his campaign, because it's obviously an opportunistic power grab and a grift. And here's the truth about Bernie Sanders. He's an opportunistic hack. There's a reason why my wise fellow Vermonters, and this is in a Dem primary, this is mostly Democrats voting, they gave him 83 points. 83% of the vote in 2016. They gave him 51% in this last election. 51%. He lost more than 30 points. There's a reason for that. People have gotten tired of his shtick. He's an old dude with health problems who refuses to drop the term socialist, and that's another reason he's lost. He's too old, he's a socialist, and he's anti-charismatic. The things that he's peddling in time of crisis is suspend the primaries, orange man bad, we need more social programs. Compare and contrast that with Trump and Biden, by the way. Trump and Biden are doing what a president's supposed to do. We can get through this, we're all in it together, blah, blah, blah. We're doing the best we can. Biden and Trump talking openly about discussing things with one another, backhanding Sanders, by the way, in the process. Nobody wants to talk to Bernie. Hillary Clinton did this a few months ago. They're being astute, they're being solemn, they're being oddly political, presidential, whatever you want to term it. Bernie's not. He's still trying to play revolutionary. The dude's almost 80 fucking years old. He's a has-been. He's a hack. He's never accomplished anything in his political career. Goddamn nothing. Name Bernie Sanders' political accomplishments. Again, I keep asking this to Bernie fans, and sometimes they have like this pre-manufactured list that talks about a bunch of bullshit that he supposedly did, that he almost never was the author of, that many times he just joined other people on, often was partisan in its details. It didn't come from him with an I after his name, it came from him with a D after his name. So it's not really an accomplishment at all. Managed to support a union in some obscure law 20 years ago. Okay, wonderful. That's not a larger win for the American people. But I can rattle off a whole list of Trump's accomplishments, and when it comes down to it, I can rattle off some of Biden's accomplishments. When you're in politics since the 70s, you've got Joe Biden who did things, and you've got Bernie Sanders who ranted about doing things. And ultimately never was a single piece of his signature legislation passed. His biggest victory, the biggest thing I can give Sanders is he voted against starting the war in Iraq. But then again, Trump was against starting the war in Iraq too. So it's even or. Bernie Sanders has no qualifications. There's a reason. The reason he's ranting is he knows he's going to lose Wisconsin by probably 20, 25 points. When Wisconsin's voting's done, Wisconsin will go to Biden by a double-digit margin at the very least. Guaranteed. That's what will happen. Bernie will fall further behind, and each time a state has its primaries in the normal way, it gets Biden a little bit closer to technically clinching the nomination. He's already close enough at this point, halfway through the process, that Bernie Sanders has become an afterthought. Somebody the other night, they showed me this chart that they obviously made themselves, which is hilarious, of delegates talking about, almost half of the delegates haven't actually been called forth for a candidate yet. So it's like Biden at 28 versus 21 for Bernie or something. It's like, yes, okay, understood. Yes, half the delegates are up for grabs. But Bernie isn't leading in a single state, and he's 21 points behind nationwide, and he's been underperforming the polls because of his younger voting base. Younger voters turn up less at the polls. Biden voters are older. They turn up more at the polls. By the way, if you're a Democrat, you don't need to compete for the youth vote in anything other than the turnout sense. I understand Biden has a severe handicap compared with Bernie Sanders on this issue, but he's got much less of a handicap with independent voters. I don't care how many people try to claim, socialism and socialist programs are actually popular. If that's the case, why can't Bernie even get the Democrats to back him? Something obviously is responsible for this. Somebody the other day tried to drag out of their ass the idea that Bernie was losing because of suppression of felon voters. I'm like, okay, how many? So you're saying that Bernie Sanders is supported by a bunch of felons. Okay, and then they tried to tie it into race, and I'm like, you do realize that Biden actually has a significant lead among voters who are not white, correct? Especially among the black voting base. Why do you think in the South he's disproportionately outperformed? Even early in the race, South Carolina, he blew it out of the water. Largely it's because of that urban voting core. They go heavily for Joe Biden. What are you people talking about? I see a million conspiracy theories. At this point, there's nothing else to term them. I hate to even use the term. About why Bernie Sanders is being dicked around. Why Bernie Sanders actually should win. Why we should just end the nomination process. Make Bernie the captain, the comrade-in-chief of the Democratic Party. Please. Dude, he had an I after his name until 2016. Almost kept the I after his name thereafter. What did they have to bribe him to get him to not turn his back immediately on the party that did schlong him in 2016? They're not dicking him around now. Biden has simply won. You can't argue that any level of voter suppression, which isn't even happening in the primaries, fucking don't kid me around. There's no voter suppression in the Dem primaries. Voter suppression and DNC rigging and evil. That's why Bernie's losing. No, it's because he's an old socialist with no good ideas who doesn't know how to deal with anything other than his normal forte. He knows how to deal with making the pitch for free shit. He doesn't know how to respond to a pandemic. He is not the kind of person who is capable of responding to anything outside of his normal repartee of 4 or 5 wedge issues, all of which are economic in nature. And up until very recently, he was running an economic campaign in an economic boom time. Even now, the reason he's not getting a boost because of the economy having a downturn, Trump's not taking the blame for it because coronavirus exists. Biden can't exactly capitalize on that, but at least he can, again, I've said it for months now. Biden is the steward candidate. He's the dude that you choose to lose with grace by a narrow margin. Bernie Sanders is the fanatic who's got a 99% chance of going up there, getting absolutely obliterated and crushing your party in the House, the Senate, for a generation. The Democrats are not willing, as a corporation that looks at odds, that looks at statistics and numbers, to throw up a Hail Mary that will probably fail and blow up in their face. They would rather lose with grace against Trump, give him a second term, and hopefully keep the House. Which, by the way, for the DNC, is a perfectly sound strategy. Of course, for Dem voters, it'll come back to haunt them 4 years later. Oh, I'm not saying the Bernie fans aren't wrong about that part. Of course, there'll be a huge backlash among those younger voters. But some of them will get older anyway. They'll get over it. They did in 2016. Bernie Sanders sold out. He's going to sell out this time. He'll drop out at some point and endorse Biden. After getting jerked around, he'll still endorse. And his fans will see him for what he really is. By and large, they'll understand the man is a con. He's been a con since the 70s, and he's not capable of winning a general election. If you put Bernie Sanders up before Trump, Trump will absolutely annihilate him. He would lose states that haven't gone red in a half century. That's a guarantee, dude. Go ahead and try it, though. I mean, try to force Bernie down the throat of the DNC. They'll cough it right back up. That's about all. Peace out.